Hamas's tactic is please kill my people for the cameras, or even kill me for the cameras, or kill my son for the cameras. And students at Columbia and elsewhere seem to be saying, hit me or hurt me, policeman, for the cameras. So it is actually a sort of low-level version of something which is a much more brutal level, is a tactic.
And the tactic, I think we should explain to the viewers, is a tactic that's been utilized by Hamas for decades, which is to fight, to use human beings as shields, civilians as shields, hide behind children, put their military facilities in mosques, in hospitals, in schools, in markets, knowing full well that when Israel retaliates, that it's these children who will be killed, and then there's the horror of war would be then on the screens of Western consumers of the news.
Yeah.
And that propaganda element of them condemning Israel is what works for them.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Douglas Murray ripped through the fabric of our woke society in this gripping interview, exposing hard truths and sparing none. Are we nurturing a generation of ideological lemmings, paving the way for our own cultural downfall? Brace yourself for a relentless critique of Western complacency, as they tackle everything from neo-Marxism infiltrating our schools and campus crybabies to the alarming celebrations of faux victimhood and how it's a lesser form of Hamas's ideology. Are we on a slippery slope to societal collapse? Tune in to uncover their fiery calls for rediscovering merit, individual responsibility, and genuine dialogue.
All right, Douglas, you have been a friend for a very long time, and a supporter and a defender. I have so much to ask you, but the first question I want to begin with, because I'm fascinated by your speech last night, and I know that we're going to fix it when we say last night, but you were awarded the Alexander Hamilton Prize by the Manhattan Institute, and you gave a speech, and it's probably one of the most inspiring speeches I've had. And
well, thank you.
What stayed with me was that rhetorical question that you posed of what are young people, if they are confronted today with what Israel was confronted on the 7th of October, if something similar happened in America or in Europe, how many people would actually sign up for that? I wanted to reverse that, because as you were talking, I thought, oh my goodness, the images of these people coming in, actually siding with the other side, pose the other question, which is how many people would actually side with the enemy? I find that much more frightening. And I ask this question because I've been through so many exercises of the reckoning with the Second World War. There were ordinary people who worked with Hitler's scheme to take their neighbors and to take their fellow citizens to labor camps and gas chambers. And I lived in the Netherlands when this reckoning was happening. And it seemed that the hardest question was not why didn't people go to war to fight against Hitler? The hardest question was, why did my neighbor betray me? Why did they say that? And that's, I think, the question, really the question, glaring question we have to ask.
Oh, by the way, there's another version of that, which is what Solzhenitsyn asks, which is when the terrors started after Petrograd in 1917, why, when the secret police were at their weakest and they came to an apartment block in the day, why did people and the rest of the other people in the apartment block not just attack the secret police with whatever they had in their hands and kill them, wound them, send them back to the headquarters and make sure this couldn't happen? And there's a couple of stories actually of that happening in Petrograd in 1917. As a woman who actually was pulled off the street, and some other people passing actually stopped the secret police getting her. And they get her in her apartment that night. But the answer, as far as I can see, that Solzhenitsyn says is, well, the easiest answer to it is because we didn't know. It was too early. And if you'd have said in 1917, this is going to end up with the Gulag, then maybe people would have resisted.
Yeah.
But they didn't know.
But I don't buy that. It's 2024. There are two ideologies now that are aligned and that are also vying amongst themselves for dominance. One is Islamism. The other one is this neo-Marxism that we call wokeism. It's 2024.
Our so-called progressive society is breeding a generation of traitors. While we're busy navel-gazing about microaggressions, real threats are knocking at our door. Islamism and neo-Marxism are tag-teaming Western civilization, and our youth are cheering them on. It's not just about who'd fight evil anymore, it's about how many would join it. History's taught us this lesson, but we're too busy rewriting it to notice.
And we know, as clearly as daylight, the logical outcome of both ideologies. And the Islamist one, it's only in 2018 that we saw what the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria was doing to the people we conquered. The Islamic regime in Iran conquered Iran in 1979. We know what they've been up to for the last 45 years. We know that when you establish Sharia law, exactly what happens. So I want to know, in 2024, why would a student in Columbia or Cambridge University or Penn State or MIT or Berkeley, who are well-informed, most well-informed generation of all humankind, okay, the highest educated.
The most educated.
Well,
the most expensively educated.
Most expensively educated. But so and I know that the Germans and other Europeans in these hacking exercises were saying we didn't know. So that doesn't work now. There's no way you could say, I didn't know.
I think there is a way. I think quite a lot of people are saying we don't know. I mean, look at the people who are denying October the 7th and have spent the last 6 months, for instance, completely unnecessarily denying that there were, for instance, rapes of Israeli women by Hamas on the day. Why do they do that? I mean, it can't be that they just haven't looked into it, or it can't be that they've looked into it and persuaded that the video evidence isn't what it is, and the evidence of the first responders isn't what it is, and the evidence of the people in the morgues isn't what it is. It's that they cannot face up to what their own side does.
So there's sort of willful ignorance. They're trying to sort of psychologically insulate themselves from
it reminds me of something, I don't want to make the obvious comparison, but it reminds me of what people did after the Holocaust who still wanted to be Nazis. There's a great book by a German writer, Bettina Stangnev, called Eichmann Before Jerusalem, in which he described how these neo-Nazis in South America in the 1950s desperately wanted to believe that the Holocaust hadn't happened because they realized already it was a big problem for their side. And they weren't going to actually be able to get Nazism back or fascism back in Europe so long as there was this PR problem, which is how they saw it. And they get Eichmann in Argentina, and they have these tape recording sessions with him in which, among other things, Eichmann badly misreads his audience with one of the most fascinating problems of the 20th century. He gives these speeches explaining how he killed 6 million Jews.
Yeah.
And the room goes silent when he finishes because that's not what we wanted to hear.
Right.
Now, why did they not want to hear it? Because they wanted to get around the Holocaust, because they realized that there was no way you could do fascism or Nazism ever again. You would have to walk through the Holocaust, and therefore it couldn't be done. And that's what the people, I think, that's why I say it's eminently possible for them to try to get around it. Because, I mean, if somebody I supported or you supported, like, went into a country and started raping women and shooting them in the head as you rape them, I think the only thing we could do would be to say, and we would say, is like, that has happened and it's appalling, and I wonder whether
Our elite universities are churning out willfully blind ideologues. These overeducated dimwits can't face the brutal reality of their pet causes. When confronted with undeniable evidence of atrocities, they stick their fingers in their ears and scream fake news. It's not ignorance, it's cowardice. They'd rather deny reality than admit their worldview is built on quicksand. This deliberate self-delusion is how civilizations crumble.
whether my side's going wrong.
Yeah.
But that requires a degree of honesty, which, and it's much easier, and I think most people do, just you get around it.
Yeah.
You can't walk through that. They get around it. So they say, oh, it's been exaggerated, or it didn't happen, or I don't want to read about it, or it's PR, or what about Gaza? And so it's easy for these people.
Yeah, so there is, easy for these people, various forms of denial, trying to get around it. And there's another feature of denial, and I remember a thinker in the Netherlands, Paul Scheffer, used to talk about it, and he called it indifference. To what extent do we have people, just large audiences, who know perfectly well and understand exactly what it entails, but take on, maybe it's also a form of denial in itself, take on this indifferent attitude. It's not happening to me, it's not happening in my neighborhood, it's happening there.
Well, there's something that happens, there's something fascinating that happens with the nature of violence, which is that it's like something shatters around you, is my view. It happens even in a bar fight. The first time somebody throws a fist, everything changes. And our late friend Clive James was in Cambridge in 1968 when the Garden Hotel riots happened, which was big news in Cambridge at the time, but not everybody historically remembers it. There was 68ers, they were imitating it in Cambridge, England. For some reason, they protested outside this hotel, and somebody threw a brick at the hotel. And I remember Clive said that's when everything changed. The nature of violence suddenly was on the table. And I think that if you're a student at Columbia or whatever, the really interesting thing, I think I said to you the other day, the really interesting thing I think that's happening at the moment is that they've picked up an interesting tactic of Hamas. And I think Eric Weinstein said this first, but they've picked up a tactic which is, Hamas's tactic is, please kill my people for the cameras. Or even kill me for the cameras, or kill my son for the cameras. And students at Columbia and elsewhere seem to be saying, hit me or hurt me, policeman, for the cameras. So it is actually a sort of low-level version of something which, at a much more brutal level, is a tactic.
And the tactic, I think we should explain to the viewers, is a tactic that's been utilized by Hamas for decades, which is to fight, to use human beings as shields, civilians as shields, hide behind children, put their military facilities in mosques, in hospitals, in schools, in markets, knowing full well that when Israel retaliates, that it's these children who will be killed, and then there's the horror of war would be then on the screens of Western consumers of the news.
No.
And that propaganda element of condemning Israel is what works for them. So you are saying, and Eric is saying, that that tactic is now being deployed by...
Yes. Yes.
Our precious snowflakes are now cosplaying as Hamas. These campus creepabillas are begging to be oppressive for the gram, turning protests into perverser performance art. It's a sick parody of real suffering, trivializing actual oppression. This isn't activism. It's attention-seeking narcissism, masquerading as righteousness. They're playing chicken with authority, hoping for a viral moment of victimhood. It's time to call out this dangerous game before these useless idiots normalize truly evil tactics.
I wonder if there's a connection between these two things. If you're affronted with the horrible violence that happened on October 7th and you're on the Palestinian side, what you really need is to find something even worse on the Israeli side.
Yes, of course.
And if you can't find something, then you've got to make it happen yourself, right? This is one way psychologically to rationalize, to say, okay, fine, those bad things did happen, but Israel is now so much worse that even with this, it's all perfectly just to raise that flag and wrap yourself in that headscarf.
I think that's a good point you make there, but it is easy then to say, let's condemn Israel from this distance. But when we were attacked here in New York and in Paris and in London, we gave permission, full support to our governments to chase them. This is a phrase that's Biden used, I think, when he was vice president. We will chase them to the gates of hell.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, and so we were fine with that. But when Israel doesn't even chase them to the gates of hell, but is walking this very delicate line, trying to preserve the lives of the civilians. They are civilians that they have put in danger, while at the same time trying to neutralize them. We condemn Israel. And I think that's where the element maybe comes in of, is it because they're Jewish?
Yeah, of course, that's a significant part of it. But I also think there's an interesting question which both you and I have spent significant parts of our lives cycling, which is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Now, in Israel, when Israel is attacked, like it was on the 7th, who knows what to do about it? People disagree about tactics. Some people will say you shouldn't have gone in this far, or only win a bit, or do it from the air, where everyone becomes an expert in ground, house-to-house missions. But they know what to do. They've got an army, citizen army. They have significant experience in counterinsurgency and warfare, and they know what to do. What does Britain do when a suicide bomber goes into a concert hall in Manchester and blows himself up and kills 22 young people? The question, I heard it at the time, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it?
Certainly don't look back in anger.
Yes, I mean, the first thing is, of course, yes, is a few local people sing an Oasis, a banal Oasis lyric, and then suddenly all the newspapers are pushing, don't look back in anger, and the politicians are saying, isn't this a wonderful sentiment? And I was one of the only people in the country say, no, if your daughter is blown up, be very angry.
Seems reasonable.
Be very, very angry, and ask what your government's going to do about it. Yeah. But the point is, as I say, I come back to this thing that in most Western societies, the answer is the one that comes back at me, has done all my life. Well, what are you going to do about it? When you see a councillor elected in the north of England the other day in the regional elections, and he's a member of the Green Party, I think he misunderstands what Green stands for in this particular.
It's a very broad church. Yeah, there are some of the other councillors.
I wouldn't use the word church.
When terrorists hit us at home, it's chase them to hell. But when Israel defends itself, suddenly we're all peaceniks. This double standard reeks of hypocrisy, and let's face it, a nasty whiff of anti-Semitism. Our spineless leaders preach don't look back in anger while the bodies are still warm. It's time to get righteously angry and demand real action, not hashtag activism and candlelight vigils.
It's a broad sun thing. But the Green Party moves from being sort of let's all save the seals and the dolphins or whatever, and now it's Allahu Akbar. And the guy wins and he's all Allahu Akbar this, and again, it's like, well, what are you going to do about it? This is where we are. This is where Britain is.
So we have been here before on the question of what are you going to do about it, depending on the scale.
Yes.
They go to the stadium in Manchester, or the MP, or the teacher who's beheaded, or with Charlie Hebdo. In fact, remember when we all marched? I don't know.
Je suis Charlie.
Yeah, Je suis Charlie,
and that Batley teacher's still in hiding.
Yes.
So, but there was one moment I remember quite recently when all the arguments that were used, that we were told over and over again, we can't do that. We will not prevent, we will not change the laws. It's all about the fact that we're an open society. They have habeas corpus. This isn't a war. We're going to try them in courts of law, not military courts. All of that changed with Bataclan. And it wasn't the event itself. I think it was a cascade of events.
Yes, that's right.
The French government was confronted with this is not something we can control. Suddenly, state of emergency was declared.
Yes.
Now, people can be picked up at any time for any kind of interrogation, and we don't know where they're going. Do you remember the height of ISIS? In fact, when the French government was caught saying, don't bring them back, let them get killed there.
Yes.
So all the principles that were used as an argument to do nothing were suddenly cast by the wayside. And now we're in a state of emergency. And I think there is a psyche among the ruling class where they think if things go from bad to worse, we can do that.
Yes, I think that is true. I mean, there have been a few occasions that have been very bad, but not quite bad enough to have the kind of change that's expected. People always ask me, as I'm sure they do with you, like, what's the tipping point on this? And I long ago gave up saying what it would be, because, you know, I remember just every time I was wrong, I thought, this will change things. It turns out you need, I mean, even Israel needed an awful lot of horror on the 7th to stop the country ripping itself apart on a question of judicial reforms that now looks pathetic.
But do you think that Israel is sort of primed in a way?
Yes.
Because you've made this case after every single sort of horrific thing that's happened in Europe, that there could be a moment where the country decides, actually, we don't want this anymore. And time again, we've almost acquiesced. It's become sort of, the level of violence is just normalized. And so I'm very skeptical about my sort of accelerationist friends who say, you know, something big can happen and things will change. Are we just so demoralized as a society that we can no longer stick up for ourselves?
I think people don't know what they'd do about it.
Yeah.
And you have the added problem that the people in charge distrust the public, and maybe they're right.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one that I'm very torn about always, which is,
our so-called leaders are playing chicken with civilization, hoping they can flip the switch to totalitarian mode when things get bad enough. Meanwhile, we're normalizing violence faster than you can say "Je suis Charlie." Remember when we had principles? Now it's all emergency powers, and let the terrorists die over there. We're so demoralized, we can't even defend ourselves. Time to grow a spine before we're too far gone.
you know, a few years ago, the BBC finally did a program about the rape gangs, the Muslim rape gangs in the north of England, and made a fictionalized version, of dramatized version rather, of one of called Three Girls. And, you know, it only took 20 years for the BBC to finally get around to addressing this question that you've written about in Prey and elsewhere. But they made this program, it was quite good. And a little while later, a guy from Wales hired a van and drove into a crowd outside Finsbury Park Mosque in London, wounding a number of people. And my view is that, and by the way, the BBC, when they were looking for blame for how that happened, notably didn't point the finger at themselves. But the man who did it said in his interrogation by the police that he saw three girls on the BBC, and he was so angered he thought he'd get a van and drive it into a mosque. Yeah. And so, but I mention that because there's the complexity. Yeah. You've got to address this. You've got to address it. But they don't trust the public because they think my view is that most of the public can deal in the complexity of these people are criminal rapists, but that doesn't mean that you should go and attack the guy who runs the shop on the corner of your street. Yeah. But you know, there's probably a certain number of people who don't have that ability to draw that distinction. And maybe society is currently running at the speed of, we can't trust those people not to do that. I think that's where it is.
And then strangely, the reaction then to the guy who takes the van and after he watches the documentary, tries to kill people and kills people at the Finsbury Mosque. That incident is used in different ways. It's used by the Islamists with an agenda.
Yes.
To say, look, see Islamophobia, any kind of criticism or scrutiny or analysis of what's going on in our society is going to be giving way to this kind of senseless, mindless violence.
Yes.
And therefore, dear BBC or the other mainstream media outlets, stop talking about the threat of radical Islam. Whatever happens just seems to benefit the Islamists, the Marxists.
Yeah, they're very good at that.
There was a case in Germany a couple of days ago where an AfD politician, I believe, was fined not even for invective, but for publishing statistics about Afghan migrants committing rapes in Germany. It was
6,000 euros, I think the fine was.
It's astonishing.
Well, that's another...
There's a story now that someone published a book about the far right in Germany, and it captured, I think, the German fascination. Two Eastern European men, aided by a woman, who went for years were killing immigrants, choosing who they were going to kill. They were Nazis, they're part of the National Socialist.
We're trapped in a nightmare of our own making. Our spineless leaders are too terrified to speak truth, fearing we'll go full vigilante. Meanwhile, extremists exploit every tragedy to silence criticism. It's a sick game where facts are hate speech and willful ignorance is tolerance. We need the guts to face ugly truths without losing our humanity. Stop letting radicals hijack the narrative before it's too late.
Underground, and these fringe groups were always there.
Yes.
But
Yes.
one way of seeing this is actually the fact that now this whole mantra about white privilege and structural racism is giving these people who will losers, and the majority of society saw them as losers. That's why they're underground. They're being lifted above ground by this nonsense.
Well, that's been done before. That Mitterrand did that very successfully in France in the 80s by making sure that Jean-Marie Le Pen took part in the presidential television debates. And Mitterrand did it because he was going to lose and he needed to split the French right. So he split the French right by inviting a Vichyite candidate to join the debates. Very clever. And in countries like Germany, I mean, there's another thing that happens with the AfD and others, which is same thing with EDL in the UK, which is that, of course, if you say this group of people who say that they're patriotic and just want to stand up for their country and don't like their country being dismantled in front of them, if you say they're far right, they actually, then the few people who are actually far right go to them and go, oh great, we've got our own party.
We've got ourselves at home.
And then before you know it, it becomes it. The AfD is a very interesting case in point. I mean, it's obviously several different things, and there's a big struggle going on about where they might go.
I want to go back to the tipping point. Because maybe there's a scenario where the tipping point is not we're going to be confronted with a succession of violent attacks and the state is going to declare a state of emergency, but it is this gradualist, just wait them out. These European societies are not having children, they're getting old, they're dying. The number of fighting age, to go back to your question of who's going to fight for the country, the number of men in the fighting age category are shrinking. And as you just gradually Islamize, there's no need for violent action. We will capture these institutions through the ballot box. And there is some history to show that things can happen that way, do happen that way. These sorts of transformations, we've seen it in Egypt, we've seen it in Iran, we've seen it closer home in some of these towns that have become ghettoized and that are left to, for these parallel Islamist Sharia laws, soft Sharia. To take its place, and we know it's there, but we look the other way. We know that there is polygamy. We know that Sharia disputes are resolved. Disputes are resolved on Sharia lines. We know all about this whole halal infrastructure. We just let it be, and over time, I mean, we've seen it in Turkey, for instance. A lot of my secular Turkish friends, when I was in Parliament in the Netherlands, would say, "No, Erdogan is going to be transformed by the secular structures. He's not going to transform it." You don't want to tell them, "I told you so," but it has happened.
While we're busy debating pronouns, our civilization is being quietly dismantled. It's not just bombs we should fear, it's the creeping takeover through demographics and ballot boxes. Our aging, childless societies are ripe for the picking. From parallel legal systems to cultural ghettos, we're sleepwalking into our own replacement. This isn't paranoia, it's cold, hard math. Time to grow a spine or prepare for cultural extinction.
Maybe that's a tipping. There's going to be no tipping, sensational tipping.
Yeah, I think that's quite likely. And with the demoralizing of the native populations everywhere is part of the process of that. I read about this in Spectator the other week that there's now a very interesting linguistic change, which is instead of people in jobs, particularly government-appointed jobs, instead of asking for a member of ethnic minorities or any minority to step forward, they now say they would like representatives from the global majority, which is a very, very, I mean, if it sounds threatening, it's meant to be.
It is sinister.
It's meant to say, you know, I mean, not only we start off by saying the ethnic minorities in our country, and then suddenly they're not an ethnic minority, they're the global majority. Now we wonder if in response to that, the public in countries like Britain might say, well, now maybe we can have minority status.
Yeah, I was speaking to Ed West recently, and he told me that at his children's school, they have special parents' evenings for just specifically for the global majority, and they have special sort of sessions and assemblies for the global majority, which he and his family aren't allowed to attend.
Every corporation has this now, right? Every university has even rooms, spaces in American universities. They're effectively just no whites.
But maybe it's an interesting and perhaps useful change of language because it's honest. It tells the truth.
Well, it's suitably threatening. My view is, by the way, it's not going to work. I mean, if the aim of all of this BS that we've been through in recent decades is, as some people used to pretend, to let talent rip. In other words, to say, let's just like make sure there's no glass ceilings. If you're a woman, if you're gay, if you're a member of an ethnic minority, and you can do something, you should do it, and we'll encourage you, and there'll be no glass ceilings, and smash that glass ceiling, and make sure that any woman who wants to lay tarmac can lay tarmac, and any woman who's dreamt of the thrill of the railroads, just dreams of the romance and excitement of driving a train to Reading. If you want to do that, by God, that's your right, and just drive away, and hope there's no parallel parking. But the point is that in all of this, if the idea was just like let the most talented people go, then people should have seen a long time ago this isn't what we're getting. What we're getting is actually, so I always quote Nietzsche, it's not justice, it's revenge. It's you, the majority, who we now call the minority, pipe down. You've had your time, especially if you're white, especially if you're male. Oh, you've had your time. It's time for the trans black goddess to emerge and for us to worship at the new Gaia's feet. And they will lead us. I've heard white men.
Remember when diversity meant equal opportunity? Now it's a Trojan horse for revenge politics. Our spineless leaders are rebranding minorities as the global majority, turning inclusivity into exclusivity. It's not about talent anymore. It's about payback. We've gone from breaking barriers to building new segregation. This isn't progress. It's a hostile takeover disguised as social justice. Time to reclaim our cultural backbone before we're museumized in our own lands.
Who have been subjected to this say to me, well, we had our time.
Yeah.
And I always say,
are they just trying to get laid, or?
Well, my view is that they're what I call the cuttlefish. They're pretending to be meek, mild things, and then at some point move in. But no, some of them are genuinely demoralized. And I notice this among my peers, and I notice them, and I feel sorry for them. They're sort of, and they tend to vape, and they sort of cringing figures slightly, and they're sort of hoping they'll last their time.
I've seen the demoralization in California here in the United States, and I am stunned by those people who report on having attended anti-racist programs, these rituals that are put together, inspired by this woman, Robin DiAngelo, and even ex-Kendi, and then the Me Too, you are a rapist, period, and if you deny it, you're, what was it, fragile. And so you have to go through these sessions and exercises. yes, there are some people who go through these sessions and come out and say it was such a waste of time. I had to do it because I just wanted to get on with my work.
Yes.
It's a requirement, right? It's a requirement. All of these big companies, big institutions, universities, it's a requirement. You have to attend these nonsensical things. But there are those who come out completely confused, saying, exactly describing what you're saying and owning it and saying, I'm racist, toxic masculinity.
It's very successful in part because the best way to demoralize somebody is to make them doubt their most basic instincts and their most basic knowledge. You know, that's why I was always, against the sort of erosion of biological reality, was because I always said I know what comes next, which is that you can do anything. Yes. Once you've said to somebody that this table in front of you is not there, and I will have it beaten into your head that it's not there until you say it's not there, then the aim is to do something else next. And
is this a conscious choice, do you think, by a certain group of people who are seeking to demoralize society? I mean, I'm just going back to what you said about the train drivers, your recent Spectator article, where you were sort of explaining that it's very absurd that these sort of news stories just get dropped as if there's a great surprise.
The news story,
that women don't necessarily want to be train drivers.
The news story was, on the BBC, was most train drivers are middle-aged men and white. And that's not a news story. That's like.
So why is it coming out now?
Most Chinese people are Chinese.
Why are these confected news stories just
because it's all part of the same thing. It's this idea which a lot of people in newsrooms and elsewhere have, which is, you've had your time. It's time for the black trans Gaia goddess to rise up. It's like a fertility cult. Do you remember what wonderful friend of mine, Deepak Lal? Did you know Deepak? Lovely man. Lovely man. He died a few years ago. Wonderful Indian-born economist. And I remember Deepak.
We're not just witnessing demographic shifts. We're seeing the birth of oppression capitalism. These diversity gurus are selling guilt like snake oil, and our leaders are buying in bulk. It's not about equality. It's about monetizing victimhood. We've created a perverse marketplace where perceived oppression is the new currency. The more marginalized you are, the richer your cultural stock. This isn't progress. It's a Ponzi scheme of perpetual grievance.
He had a wonderful, charming way of speaking, and smoked a pipe and chortled at the human madness always. I remember Deepak once saying to me over dinner, with his wife, he said, everybody thought, Douglas, at the age of the age of rationalism would lead to the age of atheism. And he said, I think it's completely wrong. He said, I think we have entered the age of polytheism again. You have your God, I have mine, she has hers. She worships at the green idol, he worships at the golden calf. They are very keen on the cult of a Swedish school truant, and everyone has their goddesses, and sometimes they overlap. And you say, would you mind if we borrowed your temple because we find similar worshipping trends? But it is essentially a sort of movement in polytheism, and that's what I mentioned in my speech last night. That one of the chicken for KFC students at Columbia. This absurd individual, probably calls himself a they. He wears a crop top, like all people who are male with no fashion sense. And he has a belly piercing. And he's been very prominent doing the cosplay for Hamas at Columbia. Covers himself in a keffiyeh, tries to dress like Yasser Arafat, but I've never heard of him. And this idiot's or one of these sort of, chanting, of course, because if you're going to free Palestine, the obvious way to do it is to holler at people in upstate New York. But this guy, I saw a video of him the other day, and he, at the beginning of this academic year, before October the 7th, he was for a climate emergency.
Yes.
So I think the real thing that's interesting is we have a class of person in our society who, after they've been demoralized, and of course some of them, as Lionel Shriver always reminds me, some of them, they talk about how you feel self-abasement, but they feel no self-abasement themselves. They feel very good about themselves, my goodness. But the really interesting thing is there is a type of person we have created in the post-religious age or whatever, who I'm told there's an analogy about this from medieval Japan, where if you were a warrior and your liege lord died, the person to whom you had sworn fealty, you would stagger around the land looking for a new lord to swear your oath to, because in the meantime you were nobody.
Ronan. Yeah.
This is what we have. This is why the Colombian students, students at Columbia are one day green, then they're Hamas, and after the Hamas cosplay is over, there'll be something else. But that's the question underneath the question, which was how did we create what are the names again? The
Ronan. Yeah. I went to a very Catholic school, and I'm Roman Catholic, and we were taught to emulate saints. It was the best thing you could be as a saint, and you read the lives of the saints. And you went, when you're a little kid, okay, I'm going to grow up and be just like Saint Martin, Saint Therese, whoever it is. And Douglas, I remember when we were working together, we did an analysis.
These moral Ronin hop from crusade to crusade, desperately seeking purpose in our post-religious wasteland. Yesterday's climate warriors are today's revolutionaries, tomorrow's who knows what. It's not conviction, it's existential FOMO on steroids. We've bred a generation of professional outrage artists, ready to torch society for a cause they'll forget next week. This isn't activism. It's a desperate search for identity masquerading as righteousness. Of
the curriculum, and in fact, I think all the American history AP tests. And we went through them with a fine-toothed comb, and we found that it was something like 50% of the questions were on the civil rights movement or other sort of quite related movements. And if you're taught from a young age that, look, history is really awful, it's all just white men doing terrible things, it's full of horrors, but there was this thing that happened in the 60s, and that was really good. Then you give them new saints. These are the... And if you can't be like Martin Luther King, with race, you better be like him for the green issue or for Palestine or for something. Well, there is no salvation otherwise.
That's so interesting. There's an example I've been thinking about quite a lot recently in warfare, because one of the problems that generals and military leaders always face is there's a famous thing: you always fight the last war. And we're used to that in counterinsurgency and in warfare. You always fight the last counterinsurgency, and then the next one you fight the one before.
The enemy has, of course, gone.
The enemy's doing something totally new. I mean, it's like in Northern Ireland we were fighting the Mau Mau, and in Iraq we were fighting the Republican IRA,
Indiana Jones
and
is
so
still
on.
fighting the Nazis.
Yes.
The Europeans are still fighting the Nazis.
But I think that this is this fighting the last war, we probably haven't wised up to it yet, is that we're always fighting the last culture war. And really what's happening is that we're currently relitigating the 1960s without the problems that the 1960s had. I mean, why are people so determined to see racism everywhere? In the 1960s in America, that was a very important thing to see. In 2024, at an American liberal arts campus, probably not. I'd suggest definitely not.
You speak a lot to Richard Hanania.
We're stuck in a cultural time warp, endlessly reliving the 60s without the actual problems. Our woke warriors are fighting phantoms, seeing oppression in their cornflakes. We've created a generation of moral cosplayers, LARPing as civil rights heroes in a world that's moved on. We're not battling real injustice. We're tilting at windmills while real issues go ignored. Time to exit this ideological escape room.
And I think he has developed this theory analyzing the civil rights and how then seeing the world that way and interpreting history or starting history from just around the civil rights movement, then translated into changing structures, actual structures. And I've had this, and the other day I was listening to a speech given by David Starkey, the British historian. I don't know, David.
The last Tudor queen.
I laughed so many times. You may not like me saying that, but the point he was making was also this, perverting the original human rights ideas that were based on protecting the individual's freedom, individual's property, turning them into group rights, and then cultivating these new saints as
and then creating an economy out of it. I mean, the legal industry in America,
and getting paid,
and increasingly in Britain as well.
Yeah, so in Britain, David Starkey dates it back to 1997 and the Blair government. In the UK, so in the United States, it's
Civil Rights Act. I don't know. I mean,
1968.
Yeah,
it's all around the same time.
Also, Vietnam.
What started as a noble fight for individual liberty has morphed into a twisted game of group grievance poker. We've gone from protecting personal freedoms to cultivating professional victims. It's not about equality anymore. It's about who can claim the biggest oppression and jackpot. We've created a grievance industrial complex where being offended is the new gold rush. Our hard-won rights are being hijacked and repackaged as group entitlements.
Vietnam, I was speaking recently in Philadelphia, and somebody, very, very lovely, very well-educated man in his 80s or so, said to me, "You've got to remember the Vietnam effect, Douglas." And he fought in Vietnam. It's just like to be involved in a war that doesn't work and which makes you doubt your government and the direction of your authorities. And I think that's, I mean, you know, one has to recognize self-inflicted wounds. I don't think that Vietnam was the worst self-inflicted wound, but when it looks like you have no adults, that's a big problem. And I would just say, by the way, on the New Saints thing, by the way, we had Fox's Book of Martyrs, of course, all killed by your people.
Yes, we did.
But it's very interesting because, of course, some of the, I was in South Africa again recently, and you know, the story of South Africa's overcoming of apartheid is one of the great stories of the late 20th century. It's an extraordinary thing, but you know, the mistake of the American student is, for instance, they are not the ANC in the 1970s.
And Israel is not South Africa.
And Israel is not South Africa apartheid. Exactly. And it's just these endless, it's all this low resolution, it's all these attempts to impose a low resolution understanding of something on a totally different scenario. And to just go into it like, who's the good guys, who are the bad guys, with the additional thing that if you don't know, the obvious thing for any moron to do is just get wholesale whatever their side's views are. You know, I'm on the left, therefore I'm on the side of the Palestinians. Yeah, that means you're on the side of Hamas, sure. And but by the way, when you mentioned David Starkey, it's an important thing to come back to. What I thought the speech he did at the Oxford Union, it may have been the same one, recently, a very, very moving speech in which I was struck by something. I think the debate was about the great man view of history, which we've talked about before. It's a very interesting debate because this also comes to the demoralization question, which is that demoralization can be massively fueled in an individual by saying, you can achieve nothing with your life. You are a carbon emitter, and you should try not to. Best if you stopped breathing, of course. Don't have children. Don't pollute the planet with more of us. Let the moss and the trees get on just great without us. And just a set of things that say, and in any case, all history is just its class and economics and all this sort of thing. I was on the island of St. Helena the other week, and you know, when I was sitting rather grandly in Napoleon's study looking out on the ocean, apart from thinking about how to successfully take Europe this time, I just was thinking, you know, how can anyone deny the great man view of history when this man was so extraordinary that they had to put him on the furthest flung island in the world, stick 4 battalions of British troops on the island, put forts on every hilltop, a whole fleet of ships of the British Navy facing into the harbour.
Our cultural elites are peddling a new opiate for the masses, historical impotence. They're selling the lie that individuals can't shape destiny, that we're all just cogs in some grand, impersonal machine. It's not empowerment, it's learned helplessness, on steroids. They've swapped Napoleon for nihilism, trading great deeds for great despair. This isn't education, It's mass demoralization disguised as enlightenment.
To keep the power of the emperor contained. And what was the power of the emperor? This man. That was it. This little man. And
Tolstoy's brain, this question.
yes. And it's what Tolstoy spends at the end of War and Peace, just going over and over the question of Napoleon. But David Stark in his speech said, of course, the great man of your history is it's not to say there aren't other factors, but that great men and women change the course of history seems to my mind at any point irrefutable. And his point, and one of the interesting things he said was that he said when he was growing up, his somebody who was looking after him, because he had some disabilities when he was growing up, somebody who was looking after him, gave him a book of 100 great men. And she said to him, "You will be a great man one day." And it was so moving, him saying this, and you could see him choke up slightly, and he said, "I'm not a great man," which I think in his way, I think he is in his way. And certainly a very great historian. And but it was so moving hearing him describe this, because of course what I think what was catching in his voice when he described this was, this is what motored me. This is what acted like rocket fuel to get me reading and finding out, and then getting a scholarship, and then getting to Cambridge, and then being a world-class historian and writing best-selling books and traveling the world and all these sorts of things. This loss of the idea that the one man or woman can fundamentally alter the tide of history means you have demotivated people, because what is there to do other than vaguely enjoy yourself?
And that, I think, is the crisis.
The elites have swapped "you can change the world" for "you're just a carbon-emitting parasite." We're being hoodwinked into believing we're mere spectators in history's grand play, not the stars. When history's giants are bulldozed into faceless masses, our aspirations flatline. This isn't humility. It's systemic demotivation. The narrative is clear. Settle for mediocrity and passivity. Our potential isn't a smog to avoid, it's a force to harness.
So we talk a lot about the crisis of leadership. Where is this man, or where are these men, real men, and women, and then nothing in between. And I think that the problem is we've set up our status systems, you're admired and loved, you become a celebrity today for being the opposite of that. For being a victim, of crying, for literally marinating yourself in this
perverse Christianity is what it is.
Pity me thing. And so that's how to achieve quote-unquote greatness, so at least celebrity.
Respect, the pity of your peers.
The pity of your peers, but it does, the pity then delivers on material things. You get more money, you get yourself into a senior position. I am not given, I can't become CEO of this place because of, and then you have to give us a reason, something immutable.
Everyone has to talk about feeling imposter syndrome as well.
Yeah, but it is, you're chasing, or you seek a position of status, but then you give something that no one can, your skin color or your gender or whatever it is, to get, that's the argument, to get you to be the president or the CEO or the whatever. It's rewarding.
Yes. And the cannier people see the way to use that, of course. I mean, one of the funniest things is the sort of Claudine Gay phenomenon, where highly privileged people.
She went to Phillips Exeter.
I mean,
family owns all the, was it steel? They own all the steel in
yes, my favorite one is there's a few complete frauds who do the rounds. One Indian pseudo-historian, I won't name, who's forever indicting everyone else, who's from the highest caste of Indian society, and then comes to the UK and pretends to be a beleaguered minority, and that the working class white people are somehow producing him, and so on. And there are versions of this everywhere. America is rife.
Our society's gone from celebrating achievers to coddling crybabies. We've swapped ambition for affliction, trading greatness for grievance. It's not progress. It's a race to the bottom of the pity pool. We're rewarding weakness, not strength. Complaints, not competence. This isn't equality. It's a perverse inversion of merit. Time to ditch the victim complex and reclaim true achievement. Let's celebrate doers, not whiners, and before we drown in a sea of self-pity.
With sort of Haitian royalty, who have discovered that if you pass yourself off as a descendant of slaves, you can win in 21st century America.
Absolutely. So you have a class, you actually have a class, a caste
Yes.
of these fake victims
Yes.
who are amassing wealth and they're amassing power and they are now the elite. Everybody else wants to be like them.
Yes.
The young woman in Colombia who was saying she thinks she's in Gaza and she's fighting for, she's asking for water.
Humanitarian aid.
I watched with much amusement someone trying to shove their pizza box into an elaborate pulley system to get it into the, and they couldn't quite work out how to do
By the
it.
way, here we also enter the crisis, the real crisis of mental health for these people, which that I can't say girl, that woman is 33 years old.
Oh.
Interesting, isn't it? She's got a yes. She's doing a postgraduate course in something that I read the description on the website until it was taken down. She's sort of studying othering through a Marxian lens of hermeneutics with the you know, one of those one of those things. It's total nonsense. Now, if she's 33 now, assuming that she's not remedially stupid, which may be an assumption too far, she must have finished her undergraduate degree at the age of 23, which means she spent 10 years doing this hermeneutics of the pharmacology of the perpetual negation of the lesbian dance. She has spent 10 years. She has spent 10 years doing that. Now, of course, it's maybe the reason why she spent 10 years doing it is because what she is trying to do cannot be done.
Right.
I feel a little bit attacked.
It makes no sense. But you really do have to wonder, if you're 33 and you're not remotely on your way yet, you're in trouble.
Well, are you in trouble? Because in this environment, you could actually become.
Our universities have become playgrounds for perpetual adolescence, churning out professional victims instead of productive adults. We're breeding a generation of overeducated, underqualified crybabies who can dissect power structures but can't change a tire. This isn't higher learning, it's a Ponzi scheme selling useless degrees and manufactured outrage. Time to burst this academic bubble before we drown in a sea of unemployable social justice warriors.
Say, press secretary for the Biden administration, or you're very fluent in talking, stringing sentences like that, talking this nonsense for this new group of elite. Look at the CEO of NPR. I mean, look at.
Oh yeah! Wow! What a piece of work!
You see all of these individuals, and you think the president of Columbia, the president of Harvard, the president of NatWest, you name it. Suddenly, these leadership positions occupied by people who didn't get there because of their competence or because of their talent, and who aren't even pretending anymore. That's why they're there. Because they're fighting some injustice that they say happened in the past, for which they have to be rewarded. It is. She doesn't have to worry about her job.
Well, that's
until Chris Rufo comes for her.
So, let's go back to great men of history.
The corridors of power are now filled with ideologues who mastered the art of doublespeak instead of effective management. This isn't equity. It's a hollow farce where symbolic gestures trump genuine achievement. We're not solving past injustices. We're perpetuating new ones by rewarding mediocrity. It's time to demand real leadership rooted in merit before our institutions collapse under the weight of their own hypocrisy.
For a second, the US election is coming up. Donald Trump is on trial here in New York. I wondered whether you think that you subscribe to the view that he is a sort of persecuted figure in sort of American society today.
I don't have many sore toes, but you've just trodden on one.
Yeah.
I don't like talking about Trump. I think there's nothing new anyone can say. Everyone knows what it is. Everyone knew what it was in 2016. They knew what it was in 2020. They knew what it is in 2024. Maybe they'll vote for him, and maybe he'll be president. Nobody knows. Although the polls look that way. I've always wished that only one thing with Trump I've really wished, which is that his critics took the people he is speaking to seriously. That's the only. I'm always amazed by this. I mean, I've noticed this with a range of people who've been very significantly attacked. I'm not by any means comparing the two men as being alike, but I always thought this with our friend Jordan Peterson. I was always amazed by the number of hit jobs on him in the media, and I thought, if there was somebody who I disagreed with, who was filling out stadiums night after night around the world, and the audiences are mainly young, I would want to find out what that person was talking to. And there's a very odd thing that happens if you're perceived as being on the right, where they just want to take you down, take down anyone who's listening to you. And I think this is a great, great flaw of the modern left. I was talking to my friend Thomas Chatham-Williams about this last night.
Our elites are playing a dangerous game of ignore the masses. They're too busy virtue signaling to notice the ground shifting beneath their feet. While they're busy cancelling yesterday's heroes, millions are flocking to new voices. But instead of listening, they're plugging their ears and screaming, la la la. It's not just arrogance, it's societal suicide. Time to burst their bubble before we all suffocate in their echo chamber of ignorance.
We were talking about some new literature in France that's coming out, as catching up on various books recently. And Thomas said to me, I'm rather surprised you read a French left-wing novelist I read everything by. And he said, I'm rather surprised you read him. I bet he doesn't return the favor. I said, of course he doesn't. Of course he doesn't. And, so that's why it's that, I'm still bewildered that Trump's critics do not listen to why his base vote for him. And the reasons why they vote for him are very serious and important reasons, and they should be listened to.
That brings me to the whole question of restoration. It's the audiences. It's the audiences of Jordan Peterson, the audiences of Donald Trump. It's the 80+% of students who say that the police were right to come and remove these encampments and stop the disruption. We have large majorities in Western society who do not want this far left insanity, and they definitely do not want the Islamist insanity. And so when you talked about the saints, you were taught about the saints, and now it's the new saints. I think one restoration work that begins is to go back and start talking about the real saints.
Just the saints,
take us back, or talk about, listen to what Jordan Peterson is saying and why his audiences are lapping it up. What is it that's made Trump supporters so loyal to him, even as he's accused of all of these things? The more he's persecuted, I think.
It's baffling how the so-called intellectuals fail to grasp what drives massive support for controversial figures. Instead of vilifying their followers, why not investigate what fuels this loyalty? The yearning for restoration against extreme ideologies isn't just a fringe sentiment. It's a widespread demand for sanity and stability. Ignoring these voices only amplifies the divide, making the elites complicit in their own political blind spot.
There's a sense of real injustice in thinking, why is the entire system facing off with just this one man, when there are all these horrible things going on? The one man who hasn't been scrutinized ever is the other one who challenged Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and the people who brought in. Why are we not looking and scrutinizing that? And I think if you say restoration, We've got to start, we've got to retrace our steps and go back and say, to get out of this mud of demoralization that we're stuck in, we need to climb out of that. So what is there to remoralize us? Then there's the instability. What can we do to fight that, bring us back into stability? Have conversations, healthy conversations where we disagree. The other night I went and had a conversation with Richard Dawkins, who's a friend, great affection between us, but now we have this fundamental disagreement where I'm a believer, and of course he maintains with great integrity his position on atheism. And we had a conversation. It wasn't mudslinging, you're no longer my friend, I hate you from now onwards. This is the stuff that demoralization is made of. And so the remoralization is, look how amazing our society is that we can have these powerful disagreements and remain friends.
Well, one way to deal with.
We're stuck in a political witch hunt, obsessing over one figure while ignoring the real monsters lurking in the system. It's like watching a magician distract with one hand while the other picks your pocket. We need to ditch this circus and revive genuine dialogue. Let's stop the mudslinging and start talking, because real progress comes from understanding, not blind persecution.
Deal with that is, of course, and this is so hard to communicate to people, but that it's incredibly unusual. What you've just described is incredibly unusual, of course. Not today, but in human history all around the globe. As you know better than any of us. I mean, many countries around the globe, if you say, I'm a believer, you're not, I kill you. One way around or the other. It's you believe the wrong thing, and you're
Believe in your own.
you believe in your gods, I believe in mine, therefore I will kill you on behalf of my gods. And
30 years ago, when I came to the West, I thought what made the West outstanding was that you could have this. You could have people in the same room, sitting next to one another, without machetes, without swords and knives, without poisoning one another, without the bodyguards and the whole. And unfortunately, we're not unique anymore. The West is becoming like everybody else.
well, that's why it's like what I remarked about last night, to warn people that when the going back to the Garden House Hotel riot in Cambridge, when the first brick is thrown, when the first punch is thrown, when the first gun is brought on campus, as Alan Bloom famously saw in the 1960s, everything changes. And then you have a decision to make, which is, do I want to be in the realm of violence or in the realm of peaceful disagreement? And if you want to go into the realm of violence, this is what I'd say to the students at the American universities, you will make one massive misstep, which is that you'll think you can control it. And you never can. The minute you go into that realm, anything can happen. Anything. So step back.
Do you not think that maybe we should have paid?
Our society seems hell-bent on proving it can devolve into chaosy as well as any despotic regime. Once celebrated for its open, peaceful exchange of ideas, the West now teeters on a precipice of primal brutality, swapping dialogue for stones, debate for fists. It's a naive kid playing with matches, thinking it can control the inferno. This gut-wrenching slide into violence is the real Pandora's boss, how we must slam shut before it's too late.
Trips to Mogadishu for them to see what it looks like.
It's must to say this, right? Yeah, if you fly this country's flag, you should get a one-way ticket for free.
Like.
Yeah, I actually, I know a teacher who, as well, who says that whenever a child in the school in England is playing up, very, very effective way to make their behaviors improve is to ask their parents to take them to their country of origin, to meet their second cousins, and they come back transformed. It stops. And I've always found that incredibly moving, because that's a specific one with people of, specific immigrant backgrounds. But I've always wanted to find some way like that on a broader basis, to say, just step out into the world. I don't know, like maybe a compulsory gap year for all American students. It would be cheaper than college for the year. To go around some of the world's, you don't even have to go to the war zones. Just go to the poor countries. You know, go to India. See,
maybe go to Mark Zuckerberg and say, can you create a virtual reality where they can actually feel, not just imagine.
Oh,
So
please no.
immerse themselves in it. And the only problem is with virtual is you can't really smell, taste, feel, you know.
yes, and you have
The bugs buzzing in your ears.
and the imminent threat of everything going wrong. I mean, you know, that's no. I mean, this. I said this in War in the West.
Our cozy bubbles breed entitlement, blinding us to harsh realities. Imagine if everyone had a one-way ticket to places where survival trumps smartphone upgrades. We need a transformative reality check, a journey that shatters delusions and broadens perspectives. Let them taste the grit and smell the struggles firsthand. It's a crash course in gratitude and perspective that no virtual reality can replicate, teaching us to cherish and protect the freedoms we casually take for granted.
But I mean, this is why I find the hardest thing to communicate to an ignoramus who's never really left their first world country is how to communicate what gratitude they should feel. It's exceptionally hard to do because gratitude is such a comparative thing. And
it's a conservative's defining virtue, maybe, is gratitude. At least it ought to be. I mean,
it ought to be anyone's defining virtue. And, you know, people are grateful for good health. How about being grateful for relatively good health in your country? I mean in every way.
Because of
Grateful to the people who, you know, fought for all
yes,
the
absolutely.
blood, the sweat, and the tears.
And the fact that, again, going back to the great men and women of history, you know, how did this republic come about? Remarkable people. I mean, I would say, like, I can never get over the genius of Thomas Jefferson. And if he had have been a bit stupider or a bit wicked, then this whole damn country would be totally different. Or it would be recognizable, but to the side and not in a good way.
like a Canada or something really awful.
Not as bad as that.
So I guess with gratitude comes this sense of stewardship. If you're grateful for what's been given to you, then you really want to look after it and pass it on.
You want to pass it on.
We've lost that.
We need to regain it. And the best way of regaining it is to realize it's at risk. And
so then I suppose we have this sort of project, restoration. You're going to be writing a book on restoration. And it's a sort of hopeful project, I suppose. Do you have much hope that we can regain those things?
Huge
there are
hope.
certain institutions we can focus on.
Huge hope. But it will not come at the behest of government policy.
No.
It will not come because the Deputy Minister for Homeland Affairs announces a white paper that will look into this. It will not happen by a government review or a judicial review. It will happen by men and women being remarkable. It's only how it happened in the past, and it's only how it'll happen now. It means people have to step forward.
Communicating the necessity of gratitude to someone who hasn't experienced life outside the comforts of the West is a challenge. Gratitude should be a universal virtue, yet it's so often overlooked. It's about appreciating what we have, thanks to the remarkable figures of history who shaped our present. True restoration and stewardship stem from individuals, not government policies. Hope hinges on ordinary people, recognizing what's at risk and choosing to preserve it themselves.
Use their talents, all of their talents. They have to not subdue themselves, and they have to have the idea again of life as a heroic journey and not as this miserablest thing of what I call the harmlessness aspiration. The harmlessness one being, you know, go through your life, don't emit any carbon, don't be too reliant on the welfare state or whatever. Else you'd be reliant on the welfare state. But don't make any fuss really, and don't offend anybody, and so on, and then just sort of slip out in a crematorium near you. No. The aim should be the heroic journey of a life towards a direction, to orient towards truth, in the recognition that truth is not just some kind of game, but a real thing which gets you somewhere and will get us somewhere. So yeah, I have huge optimism on that. But it's with people. It's only with people.
It's encouraging.
That was lovely.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Unfortunately, the police are clearly here to arrest.
Well, it's civilization working.
Yeah.
We've got the Empire State Building gleaming over there. You've got the police sorting some sort of rotter out on the street.
For a long time. While Douglas was giving that beautiful speech. Oh.
That's lovely. Do you want to ask if Douglas has a magic wand, what he would do, or do you think he's really dealt with that question?
I think you've dealt with it. I think also the reason why we're doing it this way is because I don't want, another middle-aged woman talking down to the next generation, but talking with them. And
I still can't quite accept your definition of yourself as middle-aged. But
You should have heard Ayaan yesterday with Anna Katchen talking about how she was fading away. we were in hysterics. But Douglas, thank you for joining us on the Restoration Podcast.
thank you.
Restorationbulletin.com or
Exactly.
Restoration with
I
Ayaan
still
Hirsi
favor a
Ali.
different setup, but this was fantastic. And this was a great conversation. Yeah.
Thank
I think
you.
maybe next time we'll
Thank
have
you.
drinks.
Oh yeah, I mean, just get the bubbly up. Why not?
Yeah.
I had quite a few last night.
Really? Okay. So, well, it doesn't show. You would never know.
Was there really transition? Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I don't think. I think it's fine. I think people.
Our lives should be heroic journeys, not stagnant existences marked by merely being inoffensive or carbon neutral. Instead of aspiring to harmlessness, we should embrace boldness, using our talents fully. True progress doesn't come from bureaucratic decrees, but from individuals striving towards truth and purpose. It's about engaging deeply with life, not just gliding through it quietly. Our actions are key to meaningful change, encouraging others along the way. Douglas Murray and Ayaan Hirsi Ali's discussion challenges us to confront the decline of intellectual rigor and meritocracy in Western society. Are we sacrificing excellence for superficial inclusivity? They urge a return to personal responsibility and genuine dialogue. How can we preserve the freedoms and values at risk? If this conversation resonates, like and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Share your thoughts in the comments. How can we balance inclusivity with merit? What steps can we take to foster true progress? Join the dialogue and be part of the change. Let's strive for meaningful solutions together.